Hello and welcome. On behalf of East Asian Education Limited, I'm happy to introduce Form 2. Okay, what's Form 2? It is the second forum on the richness of manhood, which will be held on 1st November 2025 at the Suntec Convention Centre in Singapore. Form is really an opportunity for men to remind ourselves of our richness, our talents, our masculine genius, and hence our immense responsibilities to self, family, and society. The forum aims to bring together a variety of men from different backgrounds and circumstances who will share on a range of manly virtues and strengths. As men, we can learn to be better. We must. And among our many presenters is Mr. Darius Lee, a father of 2 young children so far, and the Executive Director of Cultivate SG. He believes that meaningful change begins with conversation. So at the Men's Form 2 conference, he will explore the irreplaceable role of men in family and society, drawing on current research and his conviction that culture is a garden to be cultivated, not a battle to be fought. And this episode will just give us a little teaser of the main course, so to speak, that he will serve at Form 2. So, welcome, Darius.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's right. How's everything so far with you?
Okay, fine. Busy as usual. Of course, taking care of kids and work and all.
Yep. How's wife and kids?
Yep, they're doing well. And I think we are managing well. Always appreciate the weekends where we get to take a break from all the work and get to do other things.
Yeah, which is why we are recording this on a Saturday, right?
Yes, that's right.
Well, to start up, can you tell us more about yourself and your organization, Cultivate SG?
Sure. So you've already mentioned a little bit about Cultivate SG, and so let me share a little bit more about myself. So I am a lawyer by training. I'm a married father of 2, and I'm currently the executive director of Cultivate SG, a nonprofit organization. Now, what is Cultivate SG all about? As I mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization, so we're dedicated to growing the good one conversation at a time, and we have 4 areas of focus. The first is marriage, the second is family, the third is children, and the fourth is social harmony. How do we do that? We do that through research, education, affiliation, and dialogue, REAND. So these are, broadly speaking, what we do to try to build a pro-family society in Singapore, where we can pursue the idea of what it means for human beings to flourish and to thrive, and how society can really grow in a socially sustainable manner. Now, if you don't mind, I would like to share a little bit about how I came to be involved in Cultivate, because I think that will give you an idea also about what my personal passions are about and what the organization is about as well.
Sure.
So
please do.
A little bit of background. Cultivate was incorporated in September 2022, and it officially started operations in 2023. But in fact, that whole plan started sometime perhaps around 2020, when a group of people basically approached me and asked if I would like to be part of this project to set up this new organization. Who are these people? Well, they're essentially the board of directors of Cultivate SG today. And essentially, they were concerned about the fabric of society and also about family in Singapore. And I think that for me is something that I strongly believe in. And I'm a father and I'm married. So that is, again, something quite personal to me as well. So I think for me personally, and I think for whole of society, I hope that all of us can see that family is indeed the basic building block of society. And when families do well, society does well as well. And when families do not do well, society will have various kinds of knock-on consequences.
Yes, you've mentioned quite a bit about the family, and I fully agree with you. Can you share with us what is the landscape of the family today?
It is very, very interesting in this time, in this age that we live in. So we are in Singapore, and this year is 2025. So one very obvious challenge that we have been grappling with is a demographic challenge. We have struggled with low fertility rates and falling fertility rates for many, many, many years. The government has been trying to fix that issue. And in 2023 as well as 2024, it hit a record low of 0.97. Now, in order for society to actually replace itself, you need a total fertility rate of 2.1. So we are far below even half of that amount. So there's a long way to go on that front. On the flip side of it, and this is again something that has been talked about by the government a lot, is that we are rapidly aging as a society. By next year, 2026, we are projected to become a super aged society. What does that mean? It means that at least 1 in 5 people will be aged 65 years and above. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but if we do not handle it well, you can imagine a whole wide range of challenges that arise from our low fertility rates as well as aging population. So what are they? So a few things: pressures on the healthcare system, pressures on our social support system. You might have various kinds of situations where you have families who have to take care of both the young and the old at the same time. So these are called sandwich families, and they are struggling to, of course, balance everything at the same time, to work, to take care of the elderly, to take care of the young. And what's more, if you're looking at the economic landscape, you might be looking at a situation where you have a shrinking local workforce, where you have fewer local employees to employ. Of course, as a result, wages might go up. As a result, you might need to rely on foreign workers to supplement many of the local workforce. So I think there are many, many kinds of issues that will arise down the line. And this is something that we should handle quite carefully and sensitively and also quite urgently in this time. So I think with that, that gives you the idea, of course, of how family really is the basic building block of society. If families are not thriving, are not growing, are not having children, and people don't feel comfortable having children, and so on and so forth, you will have many of the kinds of consequences that we see already today.
Yeah, the record low TFR and the rapidly aging society that we have do paint quite a dire picture of what we have today and possibly in the future as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And based on your experience and insight so far, what are the main challenges facing the family today?
Well, there's a host of challenges facing the family today, and let me just list down a few. And I think the first of it that I can think of is stresses, all kinds of stresses, whether it be work, whether it be circumstances, whether it be just basically day-to-day life in a very fast-paced society that we have in Singapore, leading to tensions between husband and wife, between parents and children, that can lead to family breakdown. And of course, there are challenges that I think all of us face. Singapore is literally one of the most overworked countries in the world, according to various studies that have been done. And so the challenge of actually balancing work and caregiving of young or old or both would be a huge challenge that all of us face and perhaps will increasingly face in the years to come. And of course, as parents, I know that Singaporean parents, we tend to be a bit more kiasu, quote unquote. And so bringing up the next generation in a wholesome and holistic manner. And I think we're not just talking about academics or studies or ensuring that they have a good future in a very material sense, but we're talking about moral development. So things like basically encouraging them to be responsible citizens, to be responsible men and women, and to have good values when it comes to attitudes towards marriage, towards family, towards even challenges like sexuality education, right? So things like that would be very, very important. And I think parents are under a lot of pressure to make sure that their children grow up well. And I think perhaps the final one I can think of at the moment would be about intergenerational tensions. Because if you think about it, when we talk about family, we're not just talking about parents and their young children or their teenage children. We're really talking about something which is multidimensional and multi-generational. Because, for example, I am a father, but I am also a son. I'm also a brother. I'm also a husband. And there are many other relationships around that. So that intergenerational relationship is something that not all of us have really paid a lot of attention to. But if you realize and if you look beneath the surface, in fact, not everything is necessarily fine and dandy between the different generations. Between, let's say, my parents' generation and my generation, we may have different attitudes towards certain things. And between my generation and my children's generation, again, we might have different attitudes towards things, and these lead to tensions between the different generations moving along. So I think these are some of the broad challenges affecting the family, and many other things are sort of the consequences that arise from there.
Yeah, I agree that the challenges facing parents, younger parents today, are really quite different from what I used to face as a younger parent. I thought it was tough, but I think it's even tougher now.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
And I understand that Cultivate SG did a parenthood and work survey. I think it was published in August 2024. Can you share with us what your survey found regarding the role of fathers versus the role of mothers?
That's a very interesting survey that we did. Now, so this parenthood and work survey was one that we published last year in August 2024. It was conducted by Milieu Insight and covered 1,000 Singaporeans, including 600 parents. So what we tried to study were attitudes towards parenthood, parental leave, and the realities of work and parenting. So what do we find about the roles of fathers and mothers? Well, for one, we found that material and financial provision was the top mentioned perceived role of a father. 44.6% actually said that, far above other roles such as things like giving moral guidance, caregiving, and education. Whereas when talking about mothers, people tended to give answers which were more based on care-oriented roles. So these were things like taking care of children. These were things like providing emotional support to children and so on and so forth. When it came to material or financial provision, this was hardly mentioned as a role of a mother. So in a nutshell, what did our survey find? It found that, well, a lot of Singaporeans think that the role of a father is about providing materially or financially. And on the other hand, the role of a mother is more of providing care, nurturing the children, and so on and so forth. And of course, when it came to caregiving for children in reality and in practice, we found that mothers were typically the main caregivers. If we were talking about daytime on weekdays, you have easily almost half, 44% of the caregivers are mothers, with the rest being things like childcare institutions. Grandparents, very interestingly, we did find that there was a fairly significant group. These were the third most common as main caregivers on weekdays.
I
But
can vouch
then
for that.
when we are talking,
Yes.
yeah, indeed,
As
I
a
know
grandparent
your story
myself.
there.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's also something that for many of the people I know, they do rely on grandparents for support, particularly when both parents are working. And when we talk about on weeknights and weekends, so you can imagine that the parents come home from work, or perhaps on weekends, when parents are not working, at least most Singaporeans do not work on weekends. You have a situation where that figure of mothers being the main caregivers that jumps to about two-thirds, right? So 66 to 67%. So you might have a situation where basically mothers, they work and then they come back from work, and sometimes they call it the second shift in terms of how they have to do caregiving as an additional job almost after they come home. But to be fair, let's talk about fathers. So only about 5% of fathers are the main caregivers of children during the day on
That's a
weekdays.
rather low figure.
Yes, indeed. But thankfully, you see that number more than double on weeknights and on weekends. So on weeknights, it's 12%, and on weekends, it's about 16 to 17%. So you see that men are indeed trying to step up. Yes, they may be pretty much the ones working, being the breadwinners, but there's also this group of fathers that comes back and takes over as the main caregiver of the children. So I think that's quite an encouraging figure. Of course, we hope to see more involvement of both mothers and fathers here at Cultivate. We don't think that parenting is just a mother's role. We think that
Absolutely.
both fathers and mothers have roles to play.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree. Fathers have such an important role to play. Well, I guess that leads us to the next question I'd like to ask you, which is, in your opinion, uh, what does the role of men in families and society currently look like? In fact, what should it be?
Hmm. So I've alluded to this a little bit earlier. What is the role of men in society? I think typically speaking, we still see that most people define the roles of men and fathers as that of being a breadwinner. And this shows not just in terms of attitudes, but also in terms of actual caregiving arrangements of children. And to be frank, we need to think a little bit more about this because it can create various kinds of pressures on both men and women. Just give an example. On men, it can actually serve to discourage them from being more actively involved in domestic life and to spend more time at work. And if an employer, let's say, adopts these kinds of attitudes that, you're a father, but basically you're supposed to be a caregiver, why are you taking leave to go back when your children are sick and things like that? It could really discourage them. But on women, it could discourage them on the flip side, which is that discourage them from pursuing various other pursuits in life and to place the caregiving expectation perhaps unreasonably on women and disproportionately on women. So that I think would be some of the challenges that are currently in place. But at the same time, I think this is not an absolute kind of situation. We do see a generational shift. And anecdotally, I mean, I've known many, many fathers, and they do indeed take on more caregiving, more involvement, even though they may not be the main caregivers, but certainly it is different from another generation that I've seen where essentially back then you would essentially have the men work and then come home and really not do much in terms of caregiving. But we have men who are indeed trying to be more involved, actively more involved. But I think we want to encourage them and not discourage them in this pursuit. So what should it be? I think in a nutshell, what I think it should be would be something like this. We need to recognize that men and women are unique, they are complementary, both in the family and society, and that applies to parenthood as well. So, fathers and mothers, they bring unique contributions to the holistic development of children. And as a society, it would really help if we put the best interests of children first so that we can ensure that society sustains itself over time because family is indeed a basic building block of society. So, what can we do? I think, first of all, men in society, right? Because that's going to be the topic of our Form 2 conference. A little bit of a teaser as to what I think men should do. I think men in society, well, they would really, really need some support in terms of really ensuring that both men and women are valued. So that means that we don't just value the contributions of women, we also value the contributions of men because no society can be complete without both men and women. So help them to thrive in their holistic development from young to old, and let's shape and build norms that will contribute to healthy and respectful relationships between both sexes across any age. So that includes things like attitudes towards sex, marriage, and parenthood. And so once we recognize these fundamental principles, it will guide us as to how we should go about our day-to-day lives. If you think about at work and at home, it means that we really need to value the contributions of both men and women, fathers and mothers. At the same time, I think we need to recognize their unique needs as well. So let's give an example. Imagine if a woman has just given birth to a new child and she goes back to work. You would imagine that she would need facilities. If she's breastfeeding, then she would need facilities to pump milk, right? And to store the milk that has just been pumped so that she can bring the milk back for the baby. So it goes down to simple things like that, being understanding, giving reasonable amounts of space and accommodations and facilities that can support these kinds of parenthood practices. And I think this goes a long way to basically send the message to people that we recognize men and women. You each have your unique gifts, your unique talents, and we really value your role and we value your life and your children too. So I think that is a really, really profound message that we can send simply by making a little bit of space, having a little bit of empathy and compassion, and also learning to design our physical space in a way that will really accommodate everyone.
Yes, I agree with you. Anecdotally, I've noticed more men are stepping up in the home and they are really helping out more with their wives and in the care of their children and with housework at home, which is a very positive sign. And I think men, we do need to step up. At the same time, I think we can do better based on that. So I think we really need to be equipped uh, and empowered to really do what we should be doing with our wives at home, right? And I think, like I said, the men and women have such a fantastic and unique and complementary role in the family and in society. We really need to work on that and build on that. Yeah. Well, let's shift on the conversation a little bit now. We do note that many families, many parents feel a lot of stress in trying to provide for their families, both mothers and fathers. And many of them have found work-life balance to be a challenge. And at the same time, the reason for wanting to do this is really to make their families as successful as possible, right? In society, perhaps more in the material sense, but really, what do you think success looks like for families?
Hmm. Success. Well, this is something that we talk about a lot in our society. And I think maybe if we take a step back and think about what Singapore society tends to celebrate, when we read the newspapers, when we see people writing on their social media, or even what government ministers say, and so on, we very often hear what's being celebrated would essentially be success in the job or career aspect of things or in the academic sense of things. And in Singapore, I think we pride ourselves in having one of the best education systems. We pride ourselves in having people who excel in various areas of professional life, of public life, or perhaps even in sports, right? So we have had Olympic champions and Paralympic champions in our midst. And these are what's generally celebrated in Singapore as success. But when we think about the wider idea of success, what does that mean? Now, success in Singapore, I think we should have a more holistic understanding of it, which is really based on success in terms of our interpersonal relationships, success in the context of family. So, what does success in family look like? I think success in family would really come from having strong and meaningful relationships with husband and wife, with children, with different generations, and building our relationships in a way where it is close, it is strong, it is resilient, and we can work together to support each other through life's ups and downs. I think that marker of success is something that we've missed out a lot in our cultural narratives, but I think it's time to bring it back to the table.
Mhm. Yes, I would agree. I think this would closely relate to another topic which I'd like to ask you about, which is happiness. I mean, many of us want to be successful for our families because we want our families to be happy. So, how can we find happiness really for our families?
Hmm. So for Cultivate, we have spoken with some large families, and I know currently Singapore defines large families as having three or more children, but we have spoken with people who've had like four or five, even up to seven children, and that
My
was
parents had
really
12.
eye-opening. Oh yes, that.
Those were the days.
Yes, those were the days. My parents had large families too, so that I think is something which was eye-opening for me when I spoke with some of these people. And perhaps what's interesting was how differently they defined success and what their markers of success in life really, really looked like. And it struck me how optimistic they were and positive they were. They weren't rich by any measure, in our common Singaporean mindset idea of rich. But indeed, they were generally people who were very, very optimistic, had a positive view of life, and certainly a positive view of children. And they really valued interpersonal relationships. So, about the study on success, there is a very, very long running study done by Harvard University in its study of happiness. It's been running since 1938. And the most consistent finding that they have made was this: what basically made people happy were positive relationships. It kept them happier, it made them healthier, and helped them to live longer. So it's not about money, it's not about academic success, it's not about work success. Certainly, those things are not necessarily bad to have, and I think many of us pursue those things, but we should not miss sight of what really is the idea of happiness. And if we want to find happiness, we find that in seeking strong family relationships, in seeking strong close relationships, let's say with friends, with relatives, and so on and so forth. And we really want to invest in seeking something in the nature of meaning and purpose rather than purely material or financial markers of success.
Yes, I was very edified and pleasantly surprised when I came across that study from Harvard. And it really validated many of the things many of us intuited, but were unable to, in a sense, verbalize. And when I came across the study, I was very, very affirmed and assured that, okay, it looks like we're going the right direction. And I think that gives a very good foundation and a basis for us moving forward in building our families, right? Yeah. So, well, let's talk about men, since we've brought up this topic about men. How can men, in particular fathers, right? How can fathers, men, contribute to the flourishing of families and society?
When my wife was pregnant with our first child, I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues at that time. And one question that I asked him was, it was a practical question, and I was trying to ask him how would he balance work and caregiving. Something that he said stuck with me, and that was the word priorities. And he basically said the idea that, it really depends on how you prioritize things. So, what I took home and what I realized is that when it comes to the role of men, in particular fathers, how do you contribute to the flourishing of families and societies? I think it comes back to your priorities. What do you ultimately prioritize? Do you prioritize yourself, money, whatever other kinds of personal pleasures and gains and whatever it is? Or do you prioritize family, society? Do you prioritize things which are perhaps above and beyond yourself? And so, what I think is important then for men and fathers to do is to really prioritize the flourishing of families and society. Once we set that goal in mind, everything else would make sense. So, for fathers, yes, perhaps many fathers are the breadwinners of their families for various kinds of reasons personal to them. Now, whatever it is, it means prioritizing your family. So many fathers will say, for example, that they're working hard to support the family. That is good. But remember this, that work is meant to support the family, not the other way around. And it is not worth it to sacrifice family for work, because if you sacrifice, let's say, all that time with your family and so on and so forth, you're never going to get it back. Your children are only going to be that age for that long, and they'll outgrow it, and they're growing into different phases of life. And once you miss it, you've missed it, right? So that's something not worth sacrificing at all. Whereas if we think about family being the basic building block of society, like I've said several times today, once we have a family that is strong, it will help society to thrive as well, both in this generation and the next. Now, for men who are not married, do not yet have children, and perhaps some men may not plan to get married or have children. Now, if that is your individual path in life, that's fine. But what you do need to realize is that that doesn't mean you have no stake in family or society at all, right? Instead, recognize also that we all come from families. We all have parents, we all have siblings, or if you do, we all have relatives, we all have extended families, and so on and so forth. And we are all part of this society. So again, make effort to invest in family because these are your family as well. Not just your spouse, not just your children, but certainly your own parents, your siblings, and more. And on a wider scale, we need to realize that we need to have the right attitudes, behaviors, and practices that will make it conducive for families and for society to flourish sustainably. So again, it boils back down to what are our priorities, what are our values, how do we want to live that out in our day-to-day life?
Very true. So far, we've been talking quite a bit about how men can play their role in helping families and society flourish, right? Perhaps, if you don't mind me asking one last question, can I flip it around? How should society help boys and men to develop and to flourish, so that they can better contribute to their families and society?
So, for one, to recall some basic ideas, men and women are both part of society, they are important to society, and so we cannot succeed as a society if either men or women or both are demoralized and are floundering in life. We need both of them to flourish and to have their abilities, their contributions, and their talents developed to the fullest in constructive ways. So I've seen some kinds of messages, particularly coming out of the West and in a lot of these social media channels, where men are somehow portrayed as being the problem in society. And when these kinds of messages become very widespread and become ingrained, it can be very demoralizing for boys and young men. And that is problematic. When you make men feel like they are the problem, you do not automatically get men saying, okay, you know what, let's try to fix all the problems that you've accused us of. Let's try to find a solution, right? If you keep telling men that they're bad, it might drive them perhaps to believe that they are indeed bad, and let's just be bad all the way. It can drive them towards, let's say, very extreme kinds of attitudes because let's just say if somebody has been telling young boys that they're bad all the time, and they hear someone out there, some influencer, some social media star, whatever it is, to just come in and say that, hey, look, we actually see you, we value you, and I think you are good. Don't listen to all these people. Now, it's very easy for them to be taken in by such messages and again to be influenced by all kinds of bad influences if they really have those kinds of bad motives in mind. So that's one thing that we should be careful about. I don't think it's wise or fruitful to demoralize any particular sex, whether it be men, women, or any particular age group, whether it be young men, young women, old women, so on and so forth. I don't think it's good to drive those kinds of wedges. So, talking about what's bad, let's talk about what's good. So, what's good? I think we need a few things in place. I think the first thing that strikes me is the idea of a positive moral vision. If you think about all the kinds of groups that have traditionally existed to develop boys into men, so you might think of groups like the Boy Scouts, or in Singapore, you might be thinking of National Service. These are really about setting a higher goal and a higher purpose and working together with other boys or men to achieve that goal together. And I think the next point is quite related, which is about having mentors and role models who are willing to guide younger men or younger boys along. And I think throughout this period of growing up, here in Singapore and certainly going through national service, I think that is something that many of us resonate with and understand because you look up to role models who model good attitude, good behaviors, skill, competence in what they do. And also at the same time, I think exhibit a certain sense of character, even in the midst of adversity. I think those kinds of mentors and role models are really important for younger boys and men. And of course, we are sometimes skeptical of the role of mentors or role models because we read news reports or stories of people who take advantage of people under their charge, whether it be child abuse, sexual abuse, and all of that. It can make us skeptical. I do understand. But what this is saying is, I think we need better role models and better mentors, and not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to put in guardrails and rules for accountability to make sure that any kind of mentors or role models behave themselves in responsible manners, so that there is a form of discipline that is instilled also for people who are in positions of authority. But we should not throw out the entire idea of having mentors or role models, because again, that's going to be dangerous and that's going to be harmful. And I think on a wider societal level, it would really help to build healthy relationships between men, women, and children, and all in between. To thrive, I think men cannot do it alone. There have to be norms, rules, and guardrails to guide men in their interactions with other men and with women and with children. And if you think about topics like sex and dating, that is one topic that nowadays I think it's a good thing that a lot of the malpractices in terms of sexual assault, sexual misconduct, pornography, and so on and so forth are being highlighted. But rather than just saying that, okay, all these behaviors, yes, they are indeed bad, but we need to really think about what is good behavior, what is appropriate behavior. So again, the idea is you can't say certain things are bad, and I think that's important to say that certain kinds of behaviors are unacceptable. But the flip side of that is there any kind of modeling in terms of positive relationships? And so setting those guardrails in place would be very, very important, and getting men to strive and to envision and to commit towards an enduring relationship in marriage and to take responsibility for the children that they father. I think that is a very, very high calling for men everywhere. And we want to inculcate that sense of moral responsibility in every single young boy, young man, even men of different ages. I think we need to do that across the board.
Yeah, I think we really need to equip, encourage, and empower men to really fulfill our roles well. And I fully agree with you that we need to have good role models, and we need to really celebrate these role models who have contributed so much and continue to contribute very much to the flourishing of their families and society. And it will go very well along with what our own Prime Minister has said, that we just want to build a we mentality and not a me mentality. And that will really involve tapping and cultivating all the strengths that we have as men, women, and children as members of society. Yeah. Well, it certainly looks like our work is cut out for us. The challenges are there, not easy at all. But it certainly is a call for us men to be better, and we must do better in our part to contribute to the flourishing of families in society today and in time to come. So thank you very much, Darius, for sharing your valuable insights with us. So, dear friends, if you want to hear more from Darius's rich insights, as well as those of the many other experts who will be presenting, come to Forum 2, the second forum on the richness of manhood, which will be held on 1st November 2025 at the Suntec Convention Center in Singapore. A fun fact, I myself will be presenting a session on why and how dads can play our role in sexuality education at home. See you there.